Please proceed.
Minister, how are you today?
Very well, thank you.
Good, good. Well, good to see you, and thank you for all your efforts, and definitely appreciate your staff. The civil service works so hard, and any department is always challenging, and especially with some of the issues that you've had to face over the last number of years. So I just want to start off on page 13 of the business plan. You mentioned that variable weather conditions in 2017 impacted crop production and grain prices. And so I was just wondering, can you share with us the total value of crops lost to drought in southern Alberta in 2017?
Thank you, member. Without a doubt, southern Alberta was particularly dry, and there's areas that were still underutilized because there a lot of crops hadn't been planted because of overly wet conditions from from the fall of 2016 to the spring of 2017. But in the south, important to note that there's 1.7 million irrigated acres in southern Alberta. Obviously not affected by drought. Matter of fact, they did really well because the temperatures are really high as well. So that's 70% of all the irrigated land in Canada is in southern Alberta. So the irrigated production did very well. Upwards to about 60 different crops are grown in southern Alberta, so I find that fascinating. As for those particular numbers you're looking for, I'm going to ask Mr. Kay to help us.
For sure.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Member, for the question. So we expect to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of around $425 million for the 2017 crop year. Now that relates to a number of programs, our hail endorsement program, for instance, our hay and pasture crop program, and our annual crop. So obviously, as we went further south last year, we saw yields drop, we saw drier conditions, and but we made it through the year relatively okay in terms of we had some moisture reserves throughout the summer that managed to get us through. But obviously, when we finished, we were very low in terms of reserves. So we've seen a lot of moisture over the last couple months. I think that will help as we move forward. But what we saw was right in that neighborhood of 400 to 425 million, and we're finalizing those estimates right now.
Right. So how much of those losses were covered by insurance and or the AFSC? Was any of that covered by AFSC?
Absolutely. So any of those clients that participate in our programs obviously will receive payments under the agri insurance program. So
okay. Okay, and so how are you working? Like, obviously, my understanding down by Milk River, that irrigation district, they basically turned off the taps there. It sounded like for a couple of weeks that they weren't able because there was so much drought that they were and reservoirs were low, is my understanding. And so what are you doing? How are you working with the irrigation districts for 2018 to kind of mitigate that in terms of reservoir levels and that sort of thing?
Thank you, member. So, there's other uses for these reservoirs, obviously from recreation or even community supply. So community supply, remains a priority, obviously. Making sure the towns have enough water. But otherwise, these irrigation districts are for irrigation. So when those reservoirs go low, it's because they're being used like they should be used, and that's getting the water on the land to irrigate those crops. This year they're probably at capacity now. And there is a bit of a concern, frankly, because the melt from the mountains hasn't occurred yet either. This is just what they have there. They're at some locations about 150% of their normal snow level. So there's quite a bit of snow in southern Alberta, and yeah, so that's the reservoirs will, I have no doubt, fill this year. Even last year in the drought, the St. Mary's, which is the feeder reservoir for a lot of the other smaller ones, it didn't go dry. It still had capacity in there. So this year, any year, the snowpack is good. It was good last year in the mountains, so the reservoirs did what they were supposed to do, and it was irrigate the land.
Right. So are we expecting a further drought in 2018? And again, so you're feeling pretty confident about this year? It's my understanding, though, that we're kind of in a 5-year to 50-year drought kind of pattern. Do you have any concerns for this year?
Southern Alberta is a normally dry portion of the continent, right? That's why the irrigation is there in the first place. Our forefathers had some within four people, had opportunities, decades ago, over 100 years ago, some of these irrigation projects to have some real foresight to be able to do irrigation projects that got, the European settlers in to be able to do what they're doing now, and that's the irrigation. So it is normally dry, conditions down there. That's why irrigation exists. And yeah, we'll see what the season holds, but I'm optimistic person by nature. Even last year with the drought conditions and everything else, we broke records records for cash sales. So farming even was a pretty good year last year.
Oh, good. On page 40 of the estimates, line item 5.3 speaks to the agriculture income support. Forecast spending is nearly double this year what it was budgeted for 2017-18. Could you break down for us why the forecast for last year was so much higher than the budget?
So yeah, thank you, member, for that question. It's income support was for the most part because of the Ag Stability Program, the rec we had within the price decline with livestock, with beef in 2016. Haven't seen a decline like that since the BSE year of 2003. So that was an issue, and the program did what it was supposed to do, and that was supply support to the cattle producers because of that severe drop in income in commodity prices.
Right. So you're budgeting a similar amount for this year. You did as you did for the previous year. Are you concerned about the similar cost overruns?
It's not. It's much like their emergency emergency services as well. Emergency budgeting is that you can't really predict what's going to happen in the year. Things are commodity prices. All commodity prices are staying pretty steady right now. Pretty reasonable. One of my favorite questions I got from a reporter was, as ag minister, what are you going to do about the high price of beef? Wrong question, wrong minister, right? I'm going to support the industry, and if the prices are good, that's good. But again, we can't predict what's going to happen, so
right.
Able to provide the support when it's needed.
Very good. So another factor you identify as a challenge for our industry is the supply chain logistics. Is this a reference to the challenge the producer having shipping grain by rail?
Absolutely. I was knee high to a prairie dog when my dad would complain about the crow rate. It's been something that's going on for generations, probably since the beginning of the railroads. So yeah, absolutely. I've had opportunity to have telephone conversations with CP and CN. Just a few weeks ago, CN appointed a new CEO, so I had a conversation with him. He comes from the marketing side of that industry, so he was well versed in the challenges we have here. They've been fairly honest. I felt very honest with me and with our producers that even though there's some natural barriers around, particularly cold winter, lots of snow, so that really affects the speed of the trains going down the track, as well as how many cars they can haul. So that's all important. But there were other things that I think we can work on. There's CN, in particular CN, northern Alberta, around Peace Country. They're always a bit of an issue there. One train in, one train going, I suppose. But they are doing a bunch of hiring. My perspective is they're doing some rehiring because I think they've probably laid off too many folks, over the past few years. They also have 80 or so locomotives on order for this year. They're doing some more infrastructure upgrades in siding and in ports and those kind of works. They're going to do some double tracking. That work is all going. And the big part from the federal government, I've had the opportunity to have conversations with Mr. McCulley, Minister of Agriculture, and Minister Garneau, the Minister of Infrastructure, federal minister, about the concerns around this. The past federal government had an interim measure to do a few things around being able to in some way increase the competitiveness of the two railroads, so they're able to get their hopefully get their products, our products to market easier. So around that is amendments to the Canadian Transportation Act, which is Bill C-49, that has gone through Senate. That's not going to help this season in particular, but hopefully in the future it will. Round grain transportation has picked up substantially. Right now, I do believe they're getting all the cars they need.
Right.
I'm less sure if the cars getting to port, if they're getting on the ships, but I think that's obviously picking up.
How significant is the challenge of the grain being displaced by oil on these trains?
I have that concern as well. I think, let's get that pipeline built. That's going to help a lot. But in my own consistency of Marathorpe, there was all kinds of hopper cars on the siding there. They're all filled with frac sand. right? They weren't filled with bitumen. There were no cars filled with bitumen. There were no cars filled with grain. It was frac sand, right? So as that economy picks up, we're going to see more of that product on the lines, and that is what it is, right? But my understanding from CN that it's only about 1% of their product is right now bituminous. Right now, that if we don't get that pipeline, that's going to increase significantly. So I don't see that as a factor. Not this time anyway.
Right. So what measures in your budget that are helping to alleviate any supply chain issues?
There, nothing in this particular budget, but I think it is something we need to keep an eye on as particularly our copper cars are aging. My conversations with CN and CP is that they also obviously own a lot of hopper cars, and they're looking to, update and buy new cars, build new cars, perhaps rehabilitate some of the older ones, because there's without a doubt a lot of those are getting aged right across the country.
Okay, thank you. So I want to move on to page 14 of the business plan. You talk about some of the challenges facing the forestry industry. And on page 14 of the business plan, it talks about uncertain market access, specifically regards to the recent trade issues with the United States. So what impact do you expect that might have on Alberta's forestry sector in terms of dollars?
Concern remains obviously that the current dispute, especially in the softwood lumber agreement, will cause some harm. Currently, with the value of the Canadian dollar, with the housing starts being quite substantially up in the United States, even with the tariffs, the industry is holding its own, is doing quite well actually. If you've had to build a deck or build a fence or something this past year, you might have noticed some products have actually tripled in price, right? And so working with, as an example, the government and our department officials working with local industries to reopen a mill in High Prairie that had been mothballed for 8 years. That's actually, it's at an OSB plant, or Oriented Strand Board, that's now up in production. Now that's aspen products, so it's not necessarily affected by softwood lumber disagreement anyway, but it does show that the housing starts up in the United States. So these tariffs in the long term, will hurt industry, but right now they're doing okay. We'll have to see. Like any commodity, prices fluctuate, but right now let's hope that they stay high.
Very good. And so are there any specific measures in your budget that would support expanding market access for our forest products?
Absolutely. On my trade missions, it's often, sometimes, overshadowed by, the work that's around agriculture, but there is, opportunities for our forestry products, not just lumber, but pulp as well. We, currently ship lumber and pulp to China, Japan, South Korea, bit to India as well. I think, India being, is going to be the third largest economy here in the next 4 or 5 years. It's important that we get into India and be able to do so. Forestry in Alberta has become particularly important. It supports a major industry in about 70 communities. Close to 19,000 people work in our forestry industry, so it's becoming important. The more we can expand those markets, the better we're all off.
Great. So part of securing more market access, it's important to have a diverse supply of forestry products. So is there anything in your budget that's, related to helping explore, again, expanding those products with the forestry industry to diversify their economy?
Yeah. Thanks, member. And I find the forestry industry is just as innovative as any industry. And, it was very interesting, I think, to note that engineered products, Oriented Strand Board in particular, was actually an Alberta invention, right? That we're able to really take advantage of, and different strategies as well to what we can do. There's Miller Western in particular has started an aspen strategy. It's a commodity. It's popular aspen trees there in the landscape that are underutilized. And part of the green zone, even the white zone, we have aspen stands. So Miller Western is looking to develop a market on aspen lumber into the United States, which I find fascinating. I think it's going to go a long way to diversify. Fill in a little bit few more of those extra blanks, so I will look to ADM Mayor. Next person.
Okay. Thanks, Minister, Chair, Member. A couple of the other initiatives we are undertaking is we work with Canada Wood, Alberta Woodworks, or Alberta Innovates to help on various product development. There's some niche type products that can be made and or tying in then to Asian markets and some of the expertise that they have to assist our industry.
Very good, thank you. Minister, can you give us a progress report in combating the mountain pine beetle?
Thank you, member. That's an important question. So yeah, we continue contributing a fair amount of funds to the combating the mountain pine beetle. Mountain pine beetle is here. It's going to be part of a control program, for foreseeable future. So we allocate about $25 million a year, for mountain pine beetle control. There's different areas of that. The best way to combat mountain pine beetle is the removal of infected trees. So that goes on every winter. Trees are cut and burned. As well as pine beetles are, they find most tasty is older pines, right? So there has been a pine, old growth forest strategy to have the companies accelerate some of their harvest plans around older trees to make them less susceptible to then pine beetle damage. It's often called a surge cut. So that is the ability to be able to do that. Now in the Northwest, it has from Whitecourt, Grand Prairie north, the efforts of the department over the years has really shown. It's been some successful. Control methods are still there, but they are well under control, even surpassing some expectations about how well they have been controlled. Now, the problem area is Hinton and Edson. They've been like all beetles, they fly, and they've been flying out of Jasper in droves. That's the proper term for groups of beetles, is droves of beetles. So droves of beetles have been coming out of, I don't know if there's not, droves of beetles have been flying out of Jasper. If you've been to Jasper, like as an Albertan, I'm quite upset what's happened in Jasper. I don't know if you're a tourist from China or Germany, where you're coming from, why you want to go to a national park of dead trees, but that's what's going to happen. Right. But in the industry, we now have a large problem in Hinton and Edson. Right. I'm confident with our control efforts, we're going to maintain that control. But it's going to take an effort.
Very good. On page 14 of your business plan, you talk about the implementation of the GBA plus policies in agriculture and forestry. So can you give us an overview or a picture of what that looks like in your department right now?
Yep. Thanks, member. I'm gonna ask ADM Andre here on my right, to be able to fill in the blanks. Thanks.
So thanks, Chair. Minister Andre Corbel, DM. The GBA Plus policy is one that's being implemented throughout government, and essentially what it does is it requires a gender-based analysis of all policies in the government of Alberta. So when we go to cabinet, for instance, there has to be an understanding of the gender-based analysis that's been conducted. It's based on a federal program that's been in place for almost 10 years, I believe, and one that we started implementing here in the government of Alberta in all ministries, at least over the last 2 or 3 years. So.
Very good. And so do you have a timeline on when that will be fully implemented?
Well, I would say it's something that just has to happen all the time, and it'll never be fully implemented. We always do GBA plus analysis, and of course it changes over time as things change, and it's not just gender-based analysis. It's the plus is really about different races and different cultures and those kinds of things. And I guess I would also take the opportunity now to talk about the focus that, as a result of some of that analysis, that's led to some training that will happen across the public service over the next 3 years on Indigenous relations. And every public servant will be trained over the next 3 years on how better to work with, collaborate, and understand the culture of Indigenous peoples in Alberta.
That's fantastic. In fact, I'll have to give you kudos because that's the best answer that I've heard from almost any other ministry on this particular issue. So good for you guys. So with the GBA plus training and the ongoing initiatives, which I would agree they need to be continuous, is there anywhere in your budget that talks about these initiatives in terms of a line item?
So Andre Corbel, DM again. The way we're doing it, and it's really been directed by the head of the public service, Marcia Nelson, is that there is always an ongoing training budget for public servants, and that is not increasing or decreasing this year with this budget. What's happening is a prioritization of training, and GBA plus analysis and Indigenous training has been
Hesitate to
made the
interrupt.
highest priority of individual
The
training.
time allotted for third party has concluded. We'll now take